The Market of Chains commander Marcus Cole had seen many strange things in his 12 years with the Terran exploration corps, but nothing could have prepared him for what he witnessed that day on the Vethrani orbital station. The station floated in neutral space far beyond Coalition jurisdiction, where human laws meant nothing and alien customs ruled everything. Marcus had come here for one simple reason, and that was to buy replacement parts for his ship, the TC's Dauntless, which had suffered damage during a routine patrol mission. His executive officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, walked beside him through the crowded corridors filled with dozens of alien species conducting business and trade. The smell hit him first, and it was a mixture of strange foods and unwashed bodies, and something else that made his stomach turn with disgust. Then he saw the source of that smell. The slave market spread across 3 massive levels of the station, with beings from countless worlds chained and caged and displayed like animals for sale. Marcus stopped walking, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. Lieutenant Chun grabbed his arm with urgency in her voice, saying that they could not interfere because the Vethrani Compact had legal sovereignty here, and any incident would cause massive diplomatic problems for the Coalition. Marcus knew she was right, but his feet carried him forward anyway into the heart of the market, where the stench of despair hung thick in the recycled air. He walked past rows of cages containing creatures he had never seen before, and some looked at him with empty eyes, while others turned away in shame, and a few reached through the bars, begging for mercy, in languages his translator struggled to process. Then he saw her. She was young by any standard he could recognize, and her skin held a soft blue tint that shimmered with patterns that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Her large amber eyes had once probably held wonder and curiosity, but now they showed only hollow resignation and acceptance of her fate. A neural suppression collar hummed around her slender neck, glowing with cruel red lights, and heavy chains linked her wrists to a metal stake driven into the deck plating. As if she were nothing more than a dog, she sat on the cold floor with her head bowed and her thin body trembling slightly, though whether from cold or fear, Marcus could not tell. The sign above her stake marked her species as Catheri and listed her price at 8,000 credits, which was roughly what Marcus would pay for a decent used shuttle. He stood there staring, and something inside him cracked like ice breaking on a frozen river. Lieutenant Chun caught up to him, whispering urgently that they needed to leave right now because the parts dealer was waiting and they had a schedule to keep. But Marcus did not move. Girl must have sensed his presence, because she slowly raised her head, and those amber eyes met his own. For a moment something flickered in her gaze, and it might have been fear, because humans were still relatively new to this part of the galaxy, and their reputation remained uncertain to most alien species. Then she did something that stopped Marcus completely and shattered whatever remained of his composure. She pressed her forehead to the cold metal deck in complete submission and spoke in accented but clear Galactic common, with words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Please, human," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "and can you buy me and take me as your slave? Because I will work hard, and I will not eat much, and I will do anything you command, and please, I am begging you, because I cannot go to the Moldrani mines, and please, I am begging you." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Marcus saw tears streaming down her blue cheeks, leaving darker trails on her skin. A Vethrani trader slithered over on its multiple legs with all the false hospitality of a predator sensing profit. The creature was tall and serpentine, with scales that gleamed like oil and too many eyes that all focused on Marcus with calculating interest. "The human shows interest," the trader said in a voice like grinding stones, "and this one is Catheri. And they are a very compliant species and very durable for labor, and I give you good price, yes, and only 8,000 credits, and I include the collar programming at no extra charge, and this is excellent deal for excellent merchandise." Marcus felt Lieutenant Chun's hand tighten on his arm in warning, but he ignored her. He looked down at the trembling girl and then back at the trader, and when he spoke his voice was quiet but something in it made the Vethrani take an involuntary step backward. "What is her name?" Marcus asked. The trader's multiple eyes blinked in confusion, and it responded with a question, asking what he meant. Marcus felt the anger building in his chest like a fire that would not be contained. "I asked you a simple question," Marcus said, "and I want to know her name." The trader recovered its composure quickly because Vethrani were merchants above all else, and a confused customer was simply a customer. Requiring clarification, "She has designation," the trader explained in a patient tone, "and her lot number is 7 Gamma 4, and we use a very organized system that makes inventory management simple and efficient." "No," Marcus said, and the single word cut through the air like a blade. He crouched down, slowly bringing himself to eye level with the chained girl, who flinched at his movement but did not look away. "I am not asking you," Marcus said to the trader without turning around, "and I am asking her." He looked into those amber eyes filled with tears and fear and broken hope. "What is your name?" he asked her gently. Silence fell across the market like a heavy blanket. Other traders paused their transactions, and buyers turned to watch, and even Lieutenant Chun stopped trying to pull Marcus away. The girl stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she could not understand. No one had asked her that question in 3 years, and no one had treated her as anything other than property since the day she was captured. Her voice emerged as barely a whisper, trembling with emotions she had long forgotten how to feel. "I am Kira," she said, "and my full name is Kira Veth of the 7th Singing." Marcus nodded slowly and repeated her name, saying that Kira was a beautiful name. Then he asked her another question that made the watching crowd murmur with confusion. "How did you come to be here?" Kira behind the Vethrani trader made a sound of impatience and complained that these questions were not relevant to the purchase, and if the human wished to buy, then they should negotiate price, and if not, then please move along, because he was disrupting commerce. Marcus ignored the creature completely and kept his eyes on Kira. She did not know how to answer because no one had ever asked and no one had ever cared, but something in this human's steady gaze made her want to try. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could answer, Marcus held up his hand gently. First he said, "I need you to promise me something." Eyes widened with fear, because promises from slaves usually meant terrible things. But Marcus's next words confused her even more. "I need you to answer me honestly," he said, "not what you think. I want to hear, but the actual truth. And can you do that for me?" Kira slowly and with great uncertainty, she nodded. In that moment, neither of them knew that this simple exchange of questions and answers would change the fate of entire civilizations. The weight of a question. Kira stared at the human crouching before her and tried to understand what was happening. In her 3 years of captivity, she had been sold 7 times and passed from owner to owner across dozens of star systems, and not once had anyone asked her to tell the truth. Owners wanted obedience and compliance and submission, and they wanted her to say whatever would please them and avoid punishment. But this human wanted truth. She nodded slowly because she did not know what else to do. Marcus studied her face for a long moment and then asked his question. "If I bought you right now," he said, "and if I paid this trader the full price he is asking, then what would you expect to happen next?" Kira blinked in confusion because the answer seemed obvious. She would become his property, of course, and she would serve him in whatever capacity he required, and she would cook his food and clean his quarters and warm his bed, if that was what he wanted, and she would do all of this without complaint, because that was what slaves did. She told him this in a flat voice that carried no emotion, because emotion was dangerous for slaves. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he asked another question, and that is, "What you want?" he said with something strange in his voice that she could not identify. Kira felt something crack inside her chest at those words. "Want." She repeated as if the word itself was foreign to her. "What I want does not matter," she said. "And what I want has never mattered since the day the raiders came to my world." She felt tears building behind her. eyes, but she fought them back, because crying was weakness, and weakness was punished. "I want to see my homeworld again," she said in a voice that trembled despite her efforts to control. "I'd want to sing the morning songs with my sisters in the crystal caves where our ancestors sang for 10,000 generations. I want to see my mother again, but the slavers killed her when she tried to protect me." Her voice cracked and the tears came despite her best efforts to stop them. "But wanting things only makes the pain worse," she said. "And so I have learned to want nothing, and I ask only to survive, and please human. The Moldrai mines are death sentences, and no one survives more than a year in those tunnels, and I do not want to die in the dark far from home." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was soft, but carried clearly across the silent markety. "I'm not going to buy you." Kira, the hope that had been building in her chest, died instantly like a candle flame snuffed out by cold wind. Of course, she thought bitterly as the familiar numbness crept back into her heart. Why would a human waste 8,000 credits on a broken Kathiri girl when there were so many other uses for such money? She bowed her head in acceptance and prepared herself for the mines and the slow death that awaited her there. But then Marcus said something that made her look up again with confusion flooding through her. "But I'm going to ask you one more question," he said, "and I need you to understand something important before I ask it." She waited in silence, not understanding. "Whatever you answer," Marcus said, "there will be no punishment and no consequences, and I am not testing you or tricking you. I simply want to know the truth." He paused and made sure she was looking into his eyes. "If the chains were gone," he said slowly and clearly, "and if the collar was removed and no one owned you, and you could go anywhere in the galaxy and do anything you wanted, then what would you do?" The question hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Kira stared at him, and her mind went completely blank because no one had ever asked her that, and the question itself seemed impossible and absurd. The Vethrani trader laughed nervously and complained that the human was confusing the merchandise, and these philosophical games were not appropriate for a simple commercial transaction. "Be quiet," Marcus said without raising his voice or turning around, and somehow those two simple words carried enough weight to silence the alien. Completely, Kira's thoughts raced in circles as she tried to process the question. What would she do if she were free? The concept was so foreign that she struggled to even imagine it. The Kathiri had been a subject species of the hegemony for 6 generations, and servitude was simply how things were for her. People freedom was a word from old songs that no one really believed in anymore. But the human's eyes held no mockery and no hidden trap that she could detect, simply waited with patience that seemed infinite, and slowly like a flower opening after a long winter. Something stirred in Kira's chest. She remembered who she had been before the chains. She remembered the crystal caves of her homeworld, where her people gathered to sing songs that had been passed down since before the stars were mapped. She remembered her mother's voice telling her that the Kathiri were once a proud people who bowed to no one. She remembered her sisters laughing and playing in the bioluminescent gardens and wondering what adventures awaited them among the stars. And she remembered the fire that had burned in her heart before the slavers came and took everything. "I would find my sisters," she said in a voice that started as a whisper but grew stronger with each word. "7 of them were taken with me and sold to different systems, and I have spent 3 years wondering if they are alive or dead. I would find them," she said again, "and bring them home." Marcus nodded slowly and asked what she would do after that. The fire in Kira's chest grew brighter and hotter, and she felt words pouring out of her that she had kept buried for years. "I would go home to the 7 singing," she said, "and I would tell my people what I have seen in the galaxy. I would tell them that the natural order the hegemony taught us is a lie, and that the idea that some species are meant to rule while others are meant to serve is nothing but propaganda designed to keep us in chains. I would tell them that I have seen species who treat each other as equals, and I have heard stories of worlds where slavery does not exist. Amber eyes blazed with a fire that the caller had failed to extinguish. "I would tell them to fight," she said, and her voice rang across the silent. "Mark it even if we lose, and even if we die, because a life in chains is not a life at all, and our ancestors did not sing in the crystal caves for 10,000 years, just so their children could kneel in the dirt and call themselves property." The Vethrani trader's laughter had died completely, and something cold and calculating was replacing the merchant's earlier amusement. But Marcus Cole was smiling, and it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a man who had just found exactly what he was looking for. Stood up slowly and finally turned to face the Vethrani trader. "Here's the thing," Marcus said in a conversational tone that somehow felt more dangerous than any shout. "My species has this quirk, you see, and we really do not like slavery." The trader tried to interrupt, saying that the Vethrani Compact had legal sovereignty in this space. "We also do not like being interrupted," Marcus continued, as if the alien had not spoken now. "I cannot shut down your market because that would cause a diplomatic incident, and do not have the authority to start a war today." He pulled out his communicator and keyed in a code. "But I can do something else, Cole to Dauntless," he said into the device, and patched me through to Admiral Chun at Coalition Command using Priority 1 authorization. Trader's face shifted to an expression that Kira recognized as fear. "What are you doing?" the alien demanded. Marcus turned back to Kira, and something in his eyes made her heart beat faster with an emotion she had almost forgotten: hope. The answer that changed everything. The communicator crackled, and a voice came through asking Commander Cole to state the nature of his priority. "One emergency." Marcus kept his eyes locked on the Vethrani trader as he spoke into the device. "I need you to connect me to Admiral Chun immediately," he said, "and tell her we have a situation involving illegally detained Coalition-aligned citizens." The trader made a strange gurgling sound that might have been disbelief. "Illegally detained," the alien sputtered. "And these are legally acquired slaves purchased through proper channels, and the Vethrani Compact has documentation for every single one." Marcus smiled that dangerous smile again. "Terran Coalition," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone in the market to hear, "officially recognized the Catheri as a sovereign people 3 months ago." He paused to let that information sink in. It was a provisional recognition pending establishment of a legitimate government, but it was recognition nonetheless. Kira felt her heart stop beating for a moment as she processed what the human was saying. Her people had been recognized as sovereign, which meant they were no longer legally classified as a subject species of the hegemony, which meant that enslaving them was no longer legal, even under the twisted laws that governed this part of space. The trader clearly understood this as well, because the alien's multiple eyes went wide with something approaching panic. That recognition was contested. The Vethrani protested with desperation creeping into its voice, and the hegemony filed formal objections, and the matter is still under review. "True enough," Marcus agreed, "but while it is under review, the provisional recognition stands." He turned to address the crowd of traders and buyers who had gathered to watch, which means he announced that every Catheri in this station is not property, but rather an illegally detained citizen of a coalition-aligned nation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Kira saw several buyers quietly backing away from their intended purchases. The communicator crackled again, and a new voice came through, sharp and commanding. "This is Admiral Chun," the voice said, "and Commander Cole, what exactly have you gotten yourself into this time?" Admiral Marcus replied with a grin in his voice, "And I am currently standing in a Vethrani slave market where I have discovered approximately 40 Catheri citizens being held in violation of coalition recognition protocols." He glanced down at Kira, who was staring at him with an expression of complete disbelief. "I am formally requesting authorization to place all Catheri individuals in this station under Terran protective custody, pending resolution of their status." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The Admiral's voice came back tired, but with a hint of something that might have been approval. You do realize this is going to cause a massive diplomatic incident, yes, Admiral? And you do realize I am going to have to explain this to the Council, yes, Admiral. There was another pause, and then the Admiral sighed authorization granted. Commander and I are dispatching a security team to your location immediately. The communicator went silent, and Marcus turned back to the Vethrani traders. So Marcus said cheerfully, a security team is on the way, and I suggest you start gathering your documentation, because the lawyers are going to want to see everything. The trader's face twisted with rage, and the alien stepped forward with its multiple arms raised in a threatening gesture. Do you have any idea what you have done, human? The Vethrani hissed, and the compact will not tolerate this interference, and there will be consequences. Marcus did not flinch or step back. I'm sure there will be, he agreed. But here is the thing about humans. He leaned in close enough that the trader could see every detail of his expression. We do not care. The words hung in the air like a challenge. We know that standing up for what is right sometimes causes problems, Marcus continued, and we know that it would be easier to look away and mind our own business and let the galaxy continue as it always has, but we cannot do that because we have tried, and it makes us sick to our stomach. He straightened up and looked around at the market, filled with chains and cages and broken spirits. Every species in this market, he said loudly, has the capacity for freedom and dignity and self-determination, till we are starting with the Kitheri. But make no mistake, he let his gaze sweep across the watching crowd. Humanity will not rest until every chain in this galaxy is broken. The security team arrived 10 minutes later, led by Lieutenant Chen, who had left to coordinate the operation. 12 armed humans in coalition uniforms spread out through the market and began the process of documenting and securing every Kitheri prisoner. Kira watched in stunned silence as a human medic knelt beside her and began scanning her vital signs with gentle efficiency. The medic was a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands. We are going to remove this collar now, the medic said softly, and it might feel strange for a moment because your neural patterns have adapted to the suppression field. Kira nodded because she could not find words. The medic pressed the device against the collar, and there was a soft click, and then the weight that had hung around her neck for 3 years fell away. Kira gasped as sensations flooded back into her mind, and it was like emerging from dark water into bright sunlight. Colors seemed more vivid and sound seemed clearer, and she could feel her own emotions again without the collar's dampening effect, numbing everything. She started crying, and she could not stop. The medic did not try to silence her or hurry her along, but simply placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and waited. Take your time, the woman said, and you are safe now. Marcus appeared beside them and crouched down to meet Kira's eyes. How are you feeling? He asked. Kira tried to answer, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to thank him, but that seemed insufficient for what he had done. She wanted to ask why he had helped her, but she already knew the answer. She wanted to tell him that he had given her something more valuable than freedom, and that he had given her hope. Instead, she simply reached out and took his hand and held it tightly. Marcus did not pull away. We still have a lot of work to do, he said gently, and your people are scattered across dozens of systems, and finding them all will take time and resources. But we will find them, he promised, and every single one. Kira believed him, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future. The next several hours were chaos as coalition personnel processed 43 Kitheri prisoners and documented evidence of their illegal detention. The Vethrani traders protested loudly but made no move to interfere because the armed humans made it clear that interference would be unwise. Words spread quickly through the station and then beyond. A human had walked into a slave market and instead of buying, had started asking questions. A human had challenged the established order that had governed this region of space for centuries. A human had looked at chains and decided that they were unacceptable, by the time the TCS Dauntless departed the station carrying 43 freed. Kathiri, the story was already spreading across the sector and somewhere in the vast network of slave routes and forced labor camps that made up the hegemony's economy. Something shifted, something cracked, because an idea had been planted that day, and ideas, unlike bodies, could not be chained. The fire spreads. 3 months had passed since the day Marcus Cole walked into a slave market and changed the fate of an entire species. Kira stood on the bridge of the TCS Dauntless and watched her homeworld grow larger in the view screen with emotions she could barely contain. The planet was beautiful in ways that the memories of a frightened child had failed to capture. Blue and green continents wrapped in swirls of white cloud, and vast oceans that gleamed like liquid silver in the light of the twin suns. She had dreamed of this sight every night for 3 years, and now it was real. Commander Cole stood beside her with his hands clasped behind his back in that patient posture she had come to know so well. Nervous, he asked without looking away from the view screen. Terrified, she admitted, and I left this world as cargo, and I return as something I do not fully understand. You return as a symbol, Marcus said, and as the voice of a people who are remembering how to be free. The past 3 months had been overwhelming in ways Kira could never have anticipated. The Coalition's intervention at the Vethrani station had triggered a cascade of events that spread far beyond anything Marcus had intended. Legal challenges had tied up the compact's slave markets for weeks and then months as lawyers argued over the status of countless species. Other civilizations had begun questioning arrangements that had stood for centuries, and client species across hegemony space had started whispering to each other about a human who asked questions instead of following orders, about a girl in chains who remembered that her people had once been free. The whispers had grown into conversations, and the conversations had grown into demands, and at the center of it all was Kira. The Coalition had asked her to speak to representatives from dozens of species, and she had told her story over and over until the words felt worn smooth, like river stones. But every time she spoke, she saw the effect her words had on those who listened, former slaves who had forgotten that they were people and subject species, who had been taught that servitude was their natural state. Something awakened in their eyes when they heard her, and it was the same fire that Marcus had kindled in her heart that day in the market. Now she was returning home to kindle that fire among her own people. The Council of Singers will not welcome me, she said quietly, and they have accommodated hegemony rule for 6 generations. And they will see me as a threat to the stability they have worked so hard to maintain. Are you a threat? Marcus asked. Kira considered the question carefully, because he had taught her that questions deserved honest answers. Yes, she said finally, and I am the most dangerous thing in the galaxy right now, because I'm an idea that cannot be unheard. Marcus nodded, and there was pride in his expression. That is exactly what I was counting on. Lieutenant Chun's voice cut through the moment with urgent professionalism. Commander, we have incoming contacts and sensors show a hegemony patrol fleet dropping out of FTL, approximately 50,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. Marcus straightened, and his casual posture shifted instantly to combat readiness. How many ships? 12, sir, and they are assuming formation around the planet. Kira felt fear clench her stomach, because 12 warships against a single Terran vessel was not a fight. It was an execution on screen. Marcus ordered. The view screen shifted to show the approaching fleet, and Kira recognized the distinctive angular design of hegemony cruisers bristling with weapons that could reduce the Dauntless to scattered atoms in moments. They are hailing us, Lieutenant Chung reported. The face that appeared on screen was familiar, and it sent a chill down Kira's spine. Overseer Kethler had been the hegemony administrator responsible for her sector when she was captured. He had personally approved her sale 3 years ago and signed the documentation that reduced her from a person to property. His eyes found her immediately standing there on the bridge in civilian clothes instead of chains. and she saw recognition and cold fury in his expression. "Commander Cole," the overseer said, in a voice dripping with false pleasantry. "And how unexpected to find a Terran vessel in hegemony space. We are in neutral space." Marcus replied calmly, "And as you well know, and we are simply returning some citizens to their homeworld." Yes," the overseer said, and his gaze never left Kira as he spoke about the coalition's recognition of the Catheri and the legal challenges and the diplomatic complications. Such a mess, he continued with a sigh that held no genuine regret, and all because a single human could not mind his own business. He leaned forward, and his false pleasantry dropped away to reveal naked threat. "You have something that belongs to the hegemony, Commander, and I am here to collect it." Marcus did not flinch or show any sign of intimidation. "The coalition does not recognize sentient beings as property, overseer, and you know our position on this matter, and the hegemony does not recognize the coalition's interference in our internal affairs," the overseer replied, "and the Catheri are a subject species under our jurisdiction, and this female was legally acquired through proper channels. Her name is Kiravith of the Seventh Singing," Marcus said quietly, "and she is not going anywhere." The overseer's expression hardened. "Then we have a problem, Commander, because I have 12 warships, and you have one, and the mathematics of this situation do not favor diplomacy." Marcus turned to Lieutenant Chun. "What is the status of our distress signal transmitted 30 minutes ago, sir, and coalition command has acknowledged receipt." "Good." Marcus turned back to the view screen, and there was something in his expression that made even the overseer pause. "Let me tell you something about humans," Overseer Marcus said, "and we are not a particularly old species, and we do not have the largest fleet or the most advanced technology. But we have something that the hegemony has never understood." He stepped forward until he was directly in front of the view screen. "We do not abandon our people, and we do not surrender to tyrants, and we do not bow to threats." He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who has already made peace with death. "So, you can destroy this ship if you choose, and you can kill everyone aboard, and you can take Kira back to chains and labor camps, but it will not change anything because the fire is already spreading across your territory right now. There are millions of beings in chains who heard about what happened on the Vethrani station, and they are asking themselves questions that you never wanted them to ask. They are wondering what they would do if they were free, and that, Overseer, is an idea that cannot be killed by weapons or threats or fleets of warships." The Overseer is an idea that cannot be killed by weapons or threats or fleets of warships. Overseer is an idea that cannot be killed by warships. The Overseer stared at him with an expression that mixed rage and something that might have been fear. "You are willing to die for this?" the alien asked with disbelief in his voice. Marcus glanced at Kira, and something passed between them that needed no words. "If that is what it takes," he said simply, "then so be it." Transmission ended, and the hegemony fleet began to move into attack formation. Kira reached out and took Marcus's hand just as she had done 3 months ago in the marquee. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "and I never wanted anyone to die for me." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "We are not dead yet." And then the sensors lit up with new contacts dropping out of FTL, dozens of them. "Coalition fleet arriving," Lieutenant Chun announced, and her voice cracking with relief. 37 ships. Sir Admiral Chun's face appeared on the view screen. "Weathered and calm, Commander Cole," she said with a hint of dry amusement, "and I understand you have managed to turn a simple homecoming into a potential interstellar war." "In my defense, Admiral," Marcus replied with a grin, "and they started it. They always do," Chun agreed. "And now let us see if we can finish it without anyone dying today." What humans did the standoff lasted for 3 days. 3 days of tense negotiations and veiled threats and weapons locked on targets across the void between the two fleets. 3 days during which the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what would happen when humanity's ideals collided with the Hegemony's centuries of established power. Kira spent those 3 days on the dauntless, watching and learning and marveling at the way humans conducted themselves in crisis. They did not panic or surrender or accept the seemingly inevitable defeat that the hegemony had planned for them. Instead, they argued and strategized and sent messages and filed legal challenges and reached out to allies across a dozen star systems. It was beautiful and terrifying and unlike anything she had ever witnessed. On the 4th day, Admiral Chun requested a direct conference with Overseer Kefler and insisted that Kira be present as well. The Overseer appeared on screen with the same cold expression he had worn throughout the standoff. Admiral Chun, the alien said, "And I hope you have come to your senses and recognized the futility of your position." Chun's weathered face remained impassive. "Overseer, I want you to understand something before we proceed." She gestured and Kira stepped forward into view of the screen. This young woman came to us in chains, and she was broken and beaten and ready to accept death as a mercy. But when one of my officers asked her what she would do if she were free, she found something inside herself that the collar had not destroyed. Chun paused, and her eyes held a weight of experience and wisdom that Kira found oddly comforting. "Commander Cole tells me that his grandfather walked 400 miles through enemy territory during Earth's second civil war to rescue 17 refugees from a detention camp. He walked alone with no support and no guarantee of success, and it took him 3 months and cost him his left leg." When they asked him why he did it, he said simply that they needed help, and he could help. That, Admiral Chun said firmly, is what humans do: find people in chains, and we do something about it. It is not always smart, and it is not always safe, and half the time it causes more problems than it solves in the short term, but it is who we are. The Overseer's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. "Pretty words, Admiral, but words do not change the mathematics of power, and the hegemony has ruled this region of space for 8 centuries. You are asking me to believe that a single species, barely 100 years into interstellar travel, can challenge that?" "No," Chun replied, "and I am telling you that the challenge has already begun, and you cannot stop it." She leaned forward, and her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Right now, across your territory, there are 100 million beings in chains who heard about what happened on the Vethrani station. They heard that a human walked into a slave market, and instead of buying, asked a question. They heard that a girl in chains remembered that she was a person, and they are asking themselves the same question that Commander Cole asked Kira. What would they do if they were free? Chun let the silence stretch before continuing. "That is the idea. You cannot kill Overseer, and that is what you should truly be afraid of, not our fleet and not our weapons. The fire that is already spreading through every labor camp and slave market and forced settlement in hegemony." Space. The Overseer stared at her for a long moment, and his multiple eyes unreadable. "You are willing to go to war over this," he said finally, "and you would sacrifice thousands of lives for an idea?" Chun shook her head slowly. "We are willing to go to war if necessary, but that is not what I am proposing." She pulled up a display showing a complex web of trade routes and diplomatic connections. The coalition has filed formal recognition appeals, with 47 species currently classified as subjects of the hegemony. Our legal teams have identified documentation irregularities in over 60% of your labor contracts, and our diplomats have been busy reaching out to hegemony trading partners who might prefer to do business with free peoples rather than slave states. She smiled, and there was steel behind it. "So here are your choices, Overseer. You can engage this fleet and kill thousands of beings on both sides and prove to the galaxy that hegemony can only maintain its power through violence. You can spend the next decade fighting legal battles and diplomatic challenges that will drain your resources and destabilize your economy, or you can withdraw and allow the Catheri to return to their homeworld and begin the process of peaceful transition. The choice is yours." The Overseer's face twisted with rage, and Kira saw his hands clench at his sides. "You think this is over, he hissed, and you think one victory changes anything. This is only the beginning, Chun agreed, but every journey starts with a single step. The transmission ended, and for a long, terrible moment, Kira was certain that the Overseer would choose Warthen. Lieutenant Chun spoke with wonder in her voice. The Hegemony fleet is withdrawing, and all 12 ships are breaking formation and moving toward FTL jump points, Marcus. But out of breath that Kira had not realized he was holding Admiral Chun's voice came through the communicator, tired but satisfied. Well done, Commander, and now get those people home. 6 years later, Kira stood in the central plaza of New Kathos, the first Kathiri city built by free hands in over 200 years. The statue before her depicted a human man crouching beside a kneeling alien girl, with his hand extended not to grasp, but to lift. In the pedestal, a simple inscription in Kathiri script asked the question that had changed everything. What would you do her? Daughter stood beside her, and they had been born free and would never know the weight of chains or the hum of a suppression collar. Around her the city hummed with life, and her people were learning to be free and to argue and create and fail and try again. It was not easy, and it was not always pretty. Freedom, she had learned, was much harder than servitude, but it was real, and it was theirs. Her communicator chimed, and a familiar voice came through, a little older now, and a little more tired. Happy Liberation Day, first speaker Ambassador Cole, she replied with warmth, and should you not be at the ceremony, Scott? Held up came the answer, and there is a situation on the Vethkai border, and some refugees from a Hegemony Mayan colony are asking for help. Kira smiled, because she already knew what came next. And what are you going to do, Marcus? She could hear his grin through the connection. Probably something stupid and definitely something human. The line went silent, and Kira turned back to the statue. She remembered the day a stranger had looked past her chains and seen a person. She remembered the question that had rekindled the fire in her heart, and she remembered the answer that had set her people free. What would you do if you were free? She would fight for those who could not fight for themselves. She would speak for those who had no voice. She would find the broken and the beaten and the forgotten, and she would ask them the same question, and one by one, light by light, fire by fire, the chains would fall, because that was what humans did. And now it was what the Kathiri did to Kira. Looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky, and somewhere out there, Marcus was walking into danger again for people he had never met. She whispered a prayer to the ancestors in the old language that her mother had taught her before the slavers came. Keep him safe, she asked, and keep his fire burning. Then she turned to face her people gathered in the plaza for the Liberation Day celebration. There was work to do. Kiraveth of the 7th singing was ready.